Hello, dear friends. Today we're journeying through the fascinating history of Thailand, reaching back 40,000 years into the past. If you enjoy these obscure historical deep dives designed to help you relax and drift off to sleep, please donate a like and subscribe. And go ahead and comment letting me know when and where you're listening. I enjoy seeing how this content brings together history lovers from all around the world. Also, let me know what historical topics you'd like to see covered next, and I'll do my best to bring it to life. The land we now call Thailand is ancient beyond measure. For more than 40,000 years, human footsteps have marked its soil. Imagine that vast stretch of time, like grains of sand slipping slowly through an hourglass. 40,000 years of sunrises and sunsets, of seasons turning, of life continuing in its patient rhythm. In those earliest days, people lived simply, moving with the seasons. They were hunter-gatherers, following the patterns of the natural world. Through dense forests they walked, their paths soft beneath towering trees. Along river valleys they settled temporarily, where water flowed cool and clear, where fish swam in gentle currents, and where the earth provided what was needed for survival. Life moved at the pace of nature itself. There was no hurry, no rush, just the steady rhythm of existence, day following night, season following season. These early humans understood the forests intimately. They knew which plants could nourish, which could heal. They understood the movements of animals, the changing of weather, the gentle promises of each new dawn. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. Over generations, over centuries, a transformation began to take root. Agriculture emerged, not suddenly but gradually, like the first light of morning spreading across a dark sky. People began to understand that seeds could be planted, tended, harvested, that the earth would give back what was carefully sown. And among all the gifts the earth offered, one became especially precious: rice. By 1,000 years before the Common Era, rice cultivation had become central to life in this land. Picture the emerald green of rice paddies stretching peacefully across the landscape, the careful work of planting, the patience of watching shoots emerge from water, the satisfaction of harvest. Rice connected people to the land in a profound way, creating rhythms of work and rest, abundance and careful preservation. This wasn't merely about food. Rice cultivation shaped entire communities, created bonds between neighbors, established patterns of cooperation that would echo through centuries. The flooded fields mirrored the sky, reflecting clouds and light. The gentle sound of water moving through paddies became a constant companion, a soft, eternal song. Around 1,500 years before the Common Era, something remarkable was happening in a place called Ban Chiang. There, communities were developing skills that would astonish future generations. This was a Bronze Age culture, but not one that simply borrowed techniques from elsewhere. These were people developing their own sophisticated understanding of metallurgy, their own methods, their own artistry. The Bronze Age represents humanity's growing mastery over materials, over fire and metal. In Ban Chiang, people were creating bronze tools and ornaments, learning to transform ore into objects both practical and beautiful. The process required patience, knowledge passed carefully from one generation to the next, and an understanding of fire's temperament. Furnaces glowed in the darkness, molten metal flowed like liquid light, and slowly tools emerged that would shape daily life. What makes this even more remarkable is that much of this development occurred independently. While great civilizations were rising in China to the north, the people in what would become Thailand were charting their own course, developing their own solutions, their own cultural expressions. They were not merely recipients of knowledge from elsewhere, but innovators in their own right, creating something unique and valuable. The earliest inhabitants of this land included Austroasiatic-speaking peoples. Languages carry within them entire worlds of understanding, ways of seeing and naming reality. These early language groups shaped the cultural landscape as surely as rivers shape the physical one. Their words describe the forests, the rhythms of cultivation, the relationships between people. Through language, knowledge was preserved and passed down, stories were told, and identity was formed and maintained across the generations. And speaking of rivers, these waterways were far more than geographical features. Rivers were life itself. They provided water for drinking and irrigation. They offered fish and other food. They created highways for travel and trade long before roads existed. Along riverbanks, settlements grew, protected by water, nourished by it, connected through it to distant communities. Imagine traveling by boat along these ancient waterways, the steady rhythm of paddles dipping into water, the riverbanks sliding past slowly, each bend revealing something new yet familiar. Rivers connected highlands to lowlands, forests to plains, people to people. They shaped where communities formed, how trade networks developed, and ultimately how civilizations rose and interacted. Thailand's geography gave it something special. Positioned as it was between different regions, different cultural spheres, it became a natural crossroads. Ideas flowed through this land like water, coming from India to the west, from China to the north, from maritime Southeast Asia to the south. This wasn't merely geographic luck, but a position that invited exchange, adaptation, and synthesis. Being a crossroads meant being open to influences while maintaining distinct character. Traders brought goods and ideas. Travelers shared stories and techniques. Religious and philosophical concepts traveled along these same routes, finding new expressions in new contexts. Yet through all of this exchange, the people of this land maintained their own identity, their own approaches, adapting what came from elsewhere into something uniquely their own. Think about how each of these elements wove together over time. The ancient hunter-gatherers walking softly through forests, the gradual shift to agriculture and the centrality of rice, the innovation of Bronze Age communities at Banqiang, the Austroasiatic peoples with their languages and cultures, the ever-flowing rivers connecting it all, and the land's position as a meeting place of civilizations. Each generation built upon what came before, not dramatically, but steadily. Children learned from parents, absorbed their knowledge, added their own small innovations, and passed everything forward to the next generation. This is how cultures develop, not through sudden leaps, but through the patient accumulation of understanding, the slow refinement of techniques, the careful preservation of what works. As you rest now, consider the quietness of that ancient life, The peace of rice paddies at dawn, mist rising from water, the satisfaction of harvest after patient tending, the warmth of community bonds forged through shared work and survival, the steady flow of rivers that connected people across distances and through time. 40,000 years is an almost incomprehensible stretch of time, yet it was made up of individual days, each one sunrise and sunset, each one lived by people not so different from us, who sought comfort, security, and meaning. They adapted to their environment, learned from it, were shaped by it, and in turn shaped it gently through their presence and their work. Let these images settle softly in your mind as you drift toward sleep. Ancient forests, patient and green, rivers flowing endlessly, reflecting sky and carrying life, fields of rice swaying gently in warm breezes. Communities working together, their voices soft in the distance, the glow of bronze being formed in careful hands, and beneath it all, the earth itself, ancient and nurturing, supporting life for 40,000 years and counting. Imagine the rhythm of waves against wooden hulls, the creak of sails catching wind, the patient journey of ships across open water. Trade routes, like rivers, connected distant worlds, and along these routes came merchants, their boats laden with goods, spices and textiles, precious stones and crafted objects. But they carried something else too, something invisible yet transformative. They carried ideas. Indian merchants were among those who traveled these routes, drawn by opportunity, by the promise of trade, by the age-old human desire to explore beyond the horizon. They sailed south and east, following monsoon winds that had guided travelers for generations. Their journeys were long, requiring patience and faith. Weeks at sea, watching stars, reading weather, trusting in the knowledge of those who had sailed before. With the merchants came monks, spiritual seekers who traveled not for profit, but for something deeper. They carried scrolls and sacred texts, philosophies and practices refined over centuries. These monks were quiet teachers, sharing their understanding with those who wished to listen, planting seeds of thought that would grow slowly across generations. And so Hinduism arrived in this land, not through conquest or force, but through the gentle process of cultural exchange. Picture conversations in marketplace shadows, stories shared over evening meals, ideas flowing like water finding its level. Hindu concepts of the divine, of cosmic order, of ritual and devotion found fertile ground in communities already rich with their own spiritual understanding. The temples that would eventually rise reflected this exchange, blending local artistic traditions with new symbolic vocabularies. Deities from the Indian subcontinent were understood through local lenses, adapted, reinterpreted, made meaningful in new contexts. This is how cultures truly meet, not through replacement, but through dialogue, through the patient work of finding common ground and shared meaning. Buddhism followed soon after, traveling the same trade routes, carried by the same winds and waves. The teachings of the Buddha, speaking of suffering and its end, of mindfulness and compassion, of the path toward peace, resonated deeply. These were not entirely foreign concepts, but ones that found echoes in existing wisdom, that spoke to universal human experiences of joy and sorrow, attachment and release. Religious ideas, once they took root, began to reshape the very foundations of society. Politics transformed as rulers adopted new frameworks for understanding power and legitimacy. Kings became not merely strong leaders but righteous ones, defenders of the Dharma, embodiments of sacred principles. The art of governance became intertwined with spiritual practice, with the ideal of the just ruler who brings peace and prosperity to the people. Art flourished in new directions. Stone and bronze began to depict divine forms, telling stories through gesture and symbol. Sacred texts inspired murals and sculptures. Architecture reached skyward, creating spaces for contemplation and ceremony. Every carving, every image, every architectural element carried meaning, inviting the viewer into deeper understanding. During the 1st through 6th centuries of the Common Era, a kingdom called Funan held influence over southern Thailand. Funan itself was centered in what is now Cambodia and Vietnam, but its reach extended westward. Its influence felt along trade routes and coastal settlements. Funan was a maritime power, its wealth built on trade, on the movement of goods between China and India, on the strategic control of vital waterways. Life under Funan's influence meant connection to wider networks, to ideas and goods flowing from distant places. It meant participation in a cosmopolitan world where different languages mingled in port cities, where merchants from various lands negotiated and exchanged not just merchandise but stories, techniques, and perspectives. As Funan's influence gradually waned, other cultures rose to prominence. In central Thailand, from the 6th through 11th centuries, Dvaravati culture flourished. Dvaravati wasn't a unified empire with clear borders, but rather a cultural sphere, a collection of city-states sharing common artistic styles, religious practices, and ways of life. The people of Dvaravati embraced Theravada Buddhism with particular devotion. Theravada, the way of the elders, emphasized individual practice, monastic discipline, and direct engagement with the Buddha's teachings. Monasteries became centers of learning and spiritual life. Monks preserved texts, taught students, and served as moral guides for their communities. Picture a Dvaravati monastery at dawn, the soft sound of chanting, voices in harmony, ancient words repeated with mindful presence, the scent of incense drifting on morning air, the quiet footsteps of monks beginning their daily routines. Each action performed with careful attention. This was life organized around spiritual practice, around the cultivation of wisdom and compassion. Much of Dvaravati culture was influenced by the Mon people, whose presence in the region stretched back centuries. The Mon left lasting legacies in both art and religion. Their artistic traditions shaped how Buddhist imagery was rendered, creating distinctive styles that would influence Thai art for centuries to come. Mon sculptors developed particular ways of depicting the Buddha, capturing both serenity and teaching presence in stone and bronze. The Mon language and script became vehicles for preserving Buddhist texts. Scholars painstakingly copied sutras, ensuring that the Buddha's words would survive for future generations. This wasn't merely mechanical reproduction, but an act of devotion, each character formed with care, each text a gift to those yet to come. Religious architecture bore Mon influence too. The design of stupas, monuments containing sacred relics, reflected Mon aesthetic principles. The proportions, the symbolic elements, the ways these structures invited circumambulation and contemplation, all carried forward Mon understanding of how physical space could support spiritual practice. While Dvaravati flourished in the central regions, another great power was growing to the east. The Khmer Empire, centered at Angkor, became one of Southeast Asia's most formidable civilizations. The Khmer were master builders, creating vast temple complexes, sophisticated irrigation systems, and administrative networks that held together a far-reaching empire. The Khmer Empire began expanding westward, drawn by resources, by strategic advantage, by the same imperial ambitions that drive all expanding powers. This expansion brought much of eastern and northeastern Thailand under Khmer control. The process was gradual, accomplished through a combination of military might, strategic alliances, and the slow extension of administrative authority. Coming under Khmer control meant integration into a different political and cultural system. Khmer administrative practices were imposed. Tax systems were established. The Khmer language became the language of officialdom. Grand temples were constructed in the Khmer style, proclaiming both religious devotion and political power. Yet even as Khmer influence spread, local cultures didn't simply disappear. People continued speaking their own languages at home. Local religious practices blended with Khmer traditions. Artistic styles merged, creating hybrid forms. This is the nature of cultural contact in real life, messy and complex, never total replacement, but always negotiation, adaptation, and synthesis. The temples built during this period still stand, silent witnesses to this long-ago exchange. Their stones tell stories of skilled craftsmen, of detailed planning, of communities mobilized for massive building projects. The intricate carvings depict scenes from Hindu epics and Buddhist teachings, preserved in stone for centuries. Life for ordinary people during these centuries continued in its rhythms. Farmers still planted rice, tended fields, harvested grain. Fishermen still cast nets and waited patiently for the catch. Artisans still practiced their crafts, creating the objects daily life required. Children played, elders taught, communities celebrated festivals and mourned losses. But the framework around that daily life was shaped by these larger forces. The religions that arrived along trade routes provided new ways of understanding existence. The kingdoms and empires that rose and fell created the political contexts in which people lived. The artistic and architectural legacies left by cultures like the Mon and Khmer created the visual landscape of sacred space. Each of these elements, trade and religion, kingdoms and cultures, wove together into the rich tapestry that would become Thai civilization. Nothing emerged fully formed. Everything was process, adaptation, the slow work of generations building on what came before while adding their own contributions. Consider that slow unfolding. Trade ships arriving, their journeys measured in weeks and months. Ideas spreading not through instant communication, but through personal transmission, teacher to student, text to reader. Kingdoms rising over decades and centuries, their influence expanding gradually. Art styles evolving as techniques passed from master to apprentice. Think of the Dvaravati monks at their morning chants, voices soft and steady. The Mon artisans shaping bronze with patient skill. The Khmer builders raising stone temples that would outlast their empire. The merchants traveling trade routes carrying more than they knew. The farmers in their fields continuing their essential work beneath all these shifting powers. each moment built on the previous one. Each generation inherited a world shaped by their ancestors and left a world slightly transformed for their descendants. This is the true nature of history, not dramatic and sudden, but patient and accumulating, like sediment slowly forming stone, like rivers gradually shaping valleys. The physical evidence of Khmer power remains visible across the landscape even today. Angkorian temples were built on Thai soil, massive stone structures that declared both religious devotion and political authority. These weren't simple shrines, but elaborate complexes, their towers reaching skyward, their walls covered in intricate carvings that told stories of gods and kings, of cosmic battles and earthly triumphs. Building such temples required enormous resources. Stone had to be quarried, transported, shaped. Skilled artisans spent years on single projects. Communities provided labor, food, materials. Each temple represented not just architectural achievement, but the mobilization of an entire society, organized and directed toward monumental creation. Khmer political and architectural power dominated the region during these centuries. From their capital at Angkor, Khmer rulers projected authority across vast distances. They appointed governors, collected tribute, enforced laws. The Khmer administrative system was sophisticated, maintaining records, managing resources, coordinating activities across an empire that stretched from the coast to inland highlands. The architectural style itself became a form of political statement. To see a temple built in Khmer style was to understand immediately who held power in that region. The distinctive towers, the specific iconography, the scale and grandeur, all communicated Khmer presence and authority. Architecture was politics made permanent in stone. Yet even as Khmer power reached its height in certain regions, demographic shifts were occurring that would eventually transform the political landscape entirely. From the north, from the lands that are now southern China and the mountainous borderlands, Thai-speaking peoples were migrating south. These weren't sudden invasions, but gradual movements. Families and clans relocating over generations, seeking new lands, better opportunities, escape from pressures in their northern homelands. These migrations occurred between the 8th and 13th centuries, a span of 500 years. Some groups moved quickly, others slowly. Some found immediate places to settle. Others kept moving, searching for ideal conditions. The reasons for migration were varied. Population pressure in the north pushed some groups outward. Political conflicts displaced others. The simple human desire to explore and find new horizons motivated still others. As Thai-speaking peoples moved into the region, they encountered the established cultures already there. The Mon, the Khmer-controlled areas, the remnants of Dvaravati culture. Sometimes the newcomers found empty lands to settle. More often they arrived in places already inhabited, requiring negotiation, accommodation, and the gradual working out of new arrangements. The Thai groups brought their own traditions, their own ways of organizing society. Rather than building centralized empires like the Khmer, Thai communities formed independent city-states called Mueang. Each Mueang was essentially autonomous, centered on a fortified town and controlling the agricultural lands around it. A Mueang had its own ruler, its own administration, its own identity. These city-states valued autonomy and local rule above all else. The ruler of a Muyang was intimately connected to his people. His legitimacy derived not just from claims of divine right, but from his ability to provide security, prosperity, and justice. A ruler had to be accessible, had to understand local conditions, had to respond to the needs and concerns of his subjects. Muyang often formed alliances with one another, relationships of mutual support and cooperation. A stronger Muyang might become the senior partner in such an alliance, with smaller Muyang acknowledging its leadership. But these weren't relationships of absolute domination. The smaller Muyang retained significant autonomy, managing their own internal affairs while providing support to their more powerful ally. This political model was flexible, adaptable to local conditions. It allowed for quick responses to threats and opportunities. It preserved local traditions and identities while enabling larger-scale coordination when needed. The Muing system would shape Thai political culture for centuries, its emphasis on balance between central authority and local autonomy becoming a defining characteristic. In the northern regions where Thai migration had been particularly significant, one such kingdom began to emerge with greater ambition. The Sukhothai kingdom was founded in 1238, marking a pivotal moment in Thai history. The exact circumstances of its founding are debated by historians, but what's clear is that Thai leaders in this region successfully asserted their independence from Khmer overlordship and established their own sovereign state. Sukhothai is often considered the first Thai kingdom, the beginning of a distinctly Thai political identity. While Thai-speaking peoples had lived in the region for centuries, forming their Moyang and maintaining their cultures, Sukhothai represented something new. It was a conscious political creation, a kingdom that embraced and celebrated Thai language, culture, and traditions, while also synthesizing influences from the Mon, Khmer, and other cultures that had shaped the region. King Intrathet became its first ruler, the founder of a dynasty that would guide Sukhothai through its early decades. Little is known about Intrathet himself. The historical record from this period is fragmentary, consisting of later chronicles and scattered inscriptions, but his role as founder placed him at a crucial hinge point in history, the moment when Thai political organization moved from the Moyang system toward the creation of a more substantial kingdom. Under Intrathet and his successors, Sukhothai began to develop its distinctive character. The kingdom adopted Theravada Buddhism as its central religious tradition, building on the foundations laid by earlier Dvaravati and Mon culture. Monasteries were established, monks invited from Sri Lanka and other centers of Buddhist learning. The relationship between kingship and Buddhism, between temporal power and spiritual authority, began to take the form it would maintain for centuries. The location of Sukhothai was significant. Situated in the northern plains, it controlled fertile agricultural lands capable of producing rice surpluses. It also sat astride important trade routes, allowing the kingdom to benefit from the movement of goods between different regions. Geography provided both resources and strategic advantages, the foundations on which political power could be built. The capital city itself was carefully planned, laid out according to cosmological principles that reflected Buddhist and Hindu concepts of universal order. At its center stood temples and royal compounds. Beyond these, residential areas radiated outward. The whole city was enclosed by walls and moats, providing both physical security and symbolic definition of the space within as sacred and ordered, distinct from the wilderness beyond. Daily life in Sukhothai revolved around agriculture. The majority of people were farmers, their lives governed by the seasonal rhythms of planting and harvest. Rice paddies surrounded the capital and filled the countryside. Water management was crucial, with systems of canals and reservoirs ensuring fields received adequate irrigation during the growing season. Artisans practiced their crafts in workshops within the city and in surrounding towns. Potters created distinctive Sukhothai ceramics, vessels both functional and beautiful. Metal workers forged tools, weapons, and religious objects. Weavers produced textiles. Each craft required years of training, knowledge carefully passed from master to apprentice, techniques refined over generations. Trade brought the kingdom into contact with distant places. Merchants traveled to China, to India, to other Southeast Asian kingdoms. They returned with goods unavailable locally, with new ideas and technologies, with stories of other ways of life. This exchange enriched Sukhothai culture, adding layers of influence while the kingdom maintained its own distinct identity. The establishment of Sukhothai marked a shift in regional power dynamics. The Khmer Empire, which had dominated so much of the region, was entering a period of gradual decline. Internal challenges, economic difficulties, and the loss of outlying territories all weakened central authority. Into this changing landscape, Sukhothai and other emerging Thai kingdoms expanded their influence. This wasn't a sudden collapse of one power and rise of another, but a gradual transition extending over decades. Former Khmer territories came under new rulers. Administrative systems changed. Cultural practices evolved. The temples built during Khmer dominance remained, but new structures rose alongside them, reflecting different aesthetic principles and religious emphases. The founding of Sukhothai in 1238 thus represents more than just the creation of one kingdom. It symbolizes the emergence of Thai political and cultural identity, the point at which Thai-speaking peoples, having migrated south over centuries, having formed countless autonomous mueang, having absorbed and synthesized influences from Mon, Khmer, Indian, and other sources, began to see themselves as a distinct nation with their own history and destiny. From this point forward, Thai kingdoms would play central roles in mainland Southeast Asian history, rising and falling, competing and cooperating, but always maintaining that core identity first fully articulated at Sukhothai. The legacy of King Intrathet and the kingdom he founded would echo through the centuries, shaping how later generations understood their past and imagined their future. Among Intrathet's successors, one king would come to embody Sukhothai's aspirations and achievements more than any other. King Ramkhamhaeng, whose name means Rama the Strong, ascended to power and would transform Sukhothai from a regional kingdom into a major force in mainland Southeast Asia. Through a combination of military skill, diplomatic acumen, and genuine concern for his people's welfare, Ramkhamhaeng expanded Sukhothai's influence far beyond its original borders. He ruled during what historians recognize as the kingdom's golden age, a period when Sukhothai reached its greatest extent and achieved its highest cultural flowering. Under Ramkhamhaeng's leadership, the kingdom's territory grew to encompass much of what is now central and northern Thailand, extending even into parts of Laos and the Malay Peninsula. This expansion wasn't achieved through conquest alone, but through a careful balance of military pressure and diplomatic persuasion, of demonstrating strength while also offering the benefits of alliance. Smaller Mueang saw advantage in acknowledging Sukhothai's overlordship, protection from enemies, access to trade networks, participation in a prosperous and well-governed kingdom. All these made submission attractive. Ramkhamhaeng understood that lasting power came not just from forcing submission, but from winning genuine loyalty, from making vassals feel they benefited from the relationship. But perhaps Ramkhamhaeng's most enduring contribution came not through territorial expansion, but through cultural innovation. In 1283, the king created the Thai script, a writing system specifically designed for the Thai language. This wasn't simply an adaptation of existing scripts, though it drew on Mon and Khmer writing systems for inspiration. It was a deliberate creation, carefully crafted to represent the sounds and tones of Thai speech accurately. The creation of a distinct script was an act of profound political and cultural significance. Writing is power. It allows for the recording of laws, the preservation of religious texts, the maintenance of historical records, the conduct of administration over distance. Before Thai script, official documents had to be written in Khmer or Mon, foreign languages that created barriers between rulers and common people, that reinforced the prestige of foreign cultures. The Thai script unified language and identity in fundamental ways. Now laws could be written in a script ordinary people could learn to read. Religious texts could be translated into Thai and written down. History could be recorded in the people's own language. The script created a sense of linguistic nationalism, the feeling that Thai culture deserved its own written expression, equal in dignity and capability to any other. The famous stone inscription attributed to Ramkhamhaeng himself, carved in this new script, provides a window into his reign and his ideals. The inscription describes a prosperous kingdom where justice prevailed, where the king was accessible to his people, where trade flourished and the kingdom's boundaries extended far and wide. Whether every claim in the inscription reflects literal truth or engages in some royal propaganda, it reveals what the kingdom valued, what it aspired to be. During Ramkhamhaeng's reign, Theravada Buddhism became firmly established as the state religion. While earlier kings had supported Buddhism, Ramkhamhaeng elevated it to central importance in the kingdom's identity and governance. Monasteries received royal patronage. Monks were honored as teachers and moral guides. The king himself was portrayed as a righteous Buddhist ruler, a defender of the faith who governed according to Dharma. This relationship between Buddhism and kingship shaped the very nature of royal authority. Kings ruled not primarily through raw power or hereditary right, but through moral authority, through the perception that they governed justly and compassionately according to Buddhist principles. The ideal king was father to his people, concerned for their welfare, accessible to their petitions, just in his judgments. The inscription attributed to Ramkhamhaeng famously states that if any subject had a grievance, they could ring a bell hanging at the palace gate, and the king himself would emerge to hear their case and render judgment. Whether this bell system functioned exactly as described, the image it presents captures something essential about Sukhothai's political ideal. The king was not distant and inaccessible, but intimately connected to his people's lives and concerns. Sukhothai emphasized justice and compassion as fundamental governing principles. Laws were meant to be fair, punishments proportionate. The kingdom's prosperity should benefit all subjects, not just the elite. Royal power carried responsibility, the obligation to use authority for the welfare of the realm. These ideals, though imperfectly realized in practice like all ideals, shaped how rulers presented themselves and what subjects expected from legitimate authority. The kingdom's prosperity during Ramkhamhaeng's reign was real and substantial. Agriculture flourished, producing surplus rice for trade. Sukhothai's distinctive ceramics, particularly its Celadon wares, became prized trade goods, exported to distant markets. The capital city grew and beautified itself with temples and monuments. Artisans and scholars found patronage and support. Cultural confidence radiated from the kingdom's achievements. Yet even golden ages cannot last forever. The very expansion that brought Sukhothai glory also contained seeds of future difficulty. A kingdom stretching over such vast territory, connected by slow communications and dependent on personal loyalty between rulers and vassals, was inherently unstable. When strong kings ruled, the system worked well. When weaker successors took power, distant territories began to drift away, reasserting their autonomy or transferring allegiance to other rising powers. Over time, Sukhothai's power declined. The process was gradual, measured in decades rather than years. After Ramkhamhaeng's death, his successors struggled to maintain the kingdom's extent and influence. Tributary states became less reliable in their payments and support. Neighboring kingdoms grew stronger and more ambitious. Internal challenges emerged as different factions competed for influence at court. The kingdom didn't collapse suddenly, but slowly contracted, like a tide receding. Territories that had acknowledged Sukhothai's overlordship drifted back to independence or accepted new overlords. The kingdom's borders shrank back toward its original core territory in the northern plains. Trade networks shifted as other centers gained prominence. The cultural confidence of the Golden Age gave way to a more modest, defensive posture. By the late 14th century, Sukhothai had faded as a major power in the region. It continued to exist as an independent kingdom for several more decades, but its days of regional dominance were over. The kingdom that had once defined Thai identity and demonstrated Thai political and cultural capability was entering its twilight years, its influence waning as new centers of power emerged. To the south, in the Chao Phraya River Valley, a new power was indeed rising. A new kingdom was gathering strength, ambitious and well-positioned. This southern kingdom would eventually eclipse Sukhothai entirely, absorbing its territory and claiming inheritance of its traditions while forging its own distinct identity. The stage was being set for another chapter in Thai history, for the rise of a kingdom that would prove even more enduring than Sukhothai itself. The decline of Sukhothai teaches something important about the nature of political power and historical change. Nothing lasts forever. Every golden age eventually fades. Even the most successful kingdoms eventually face challenges they cannot overcome. But decline doesn't mean failure or irrelevance. Sukhothai's contribution to Thai culture, its script, its articulation of Buddhist kingship, its demonstration that Thai-speaking peoples could create sophisticated, prosperous kingdoms. All these legacies endured even as the kingdom's political power waned. The monks continued their practices in Sukhothai's monasteries. Artisans still created beautiful ceramics. Farmers still worked the rice paddies. Daily life continued, even as the political superstructure shifted and transformed. And the memory of Sukhothai's golden age, perhaps idealized and burnished by nostalgia, would inspire later generations, providing a touchstone for Thai cultural identity. In the temples of Sukhothai, stone Buddhas sat in meditation, weathering slowly over the centuries. The Thai script carved into stone inscriptions remained readable. The irrigation systems continued to channel water to the fields. These material remnants outlasted the kingdom that created them, silent witnesses to an era when Sukhothai stood at the center of Thai civilization, when King Ramkhamhaeng rang bells of justice, when a script was born, when a kingdom defined itself through compassion and Buddhist virtue. History moves on, powers rise and fall, but the contributions of previous eras accumulate, layer upon layer, creating the rich complexity of culture and identity. Sukhothai's decline cleared space for new developments, for the southern kingdom that was rising to take its turn at the center of Thai history. The Ayutthaya kingdom was founded in 1351 by King Yu Thong, who established his capital on a strategic island at the confluence of 3 rivers in the fertile Chao Phraya River Valley. The location was chosen with care and foresight. Here, rivers provided natural defenses, encircling the capital with water that could protect against invaders, while also serving as highways for trade and communication. The surrounding plains were extraordinarily fertile, capable of producing rice in abundance, the foundation of all prosperity and power. The capital itself sat on vital river trade routes that connected the interior with the sea, the highlands with the coast, distant regions with one another. Ships could sail upriver from the Gulf of Siam, bringing goods from across maritime Southeast Asia, from China, from India, and beyond. They could load cargo produced in Ayutthaya's hinterland and carry it to distant markets. This geographic advantage, this position at the crossroads of waterborne commerce, would prove central to Ayutthaya's rise and enduring prosperity. From these promising beginnings, Ayutthaya grew steadily into a regional superpower. The kingdom expanded its territory through conquest and diplomacy, absorbing Sukhothai to the north, pushing into the Malay Peninsula, to the south, extending its influence east and west. What had begun as one kingdom among several competing powers gradually became the dominant force in mainland Southeast Asia, the kingdom to which others had to respond, whose favor was worth seeking and whose enmity was dangerous. This expansion required military strength, and Ayutthaya developed formidable armed forces. War elephants trained for combat became symbols of royal power and instruments of conquest. Infantry and cavalry forces were organized and equipped. Fortifications protected key territories. But military might alone doesn't explain Ayutthaya's success. The kingdom also demonstrated administrative sophistication, the ability to govern diverse territories and peoples, to extract resources efficiently while maintaining enough local autonomy to prevent constant rebellion. The monarchy itself became highly centralized in ways that distinguished Ayutthaya from earlier Thai kingdoms. Where Sukhothai had emphasized the king as a paternal figure accessible to his people, Ayutthaya developed a more hierarchical bureaucratic system. Power flowed from the king through layers of officials, each with defined responsibilities and ranks. Provinces were governed by royal appointees who answered to the capital. The kingdom was divided into administrative units, each contributing taxes and manpower to the central government. This centralization brought efficiency and coherence to governance. Policies could be implemented across vast territories. Resources could be mobilized for large projects or military campaigns. Justice could be administered according to uniform codes rather than purely local customs. The trade-off was distance between rulers and ruled, the replacement of personal relationships with bureaucratic ones, the transformation of kingship from accessible fatherhood to remote majesty. Kings of Ayutthaya were viewed as divine rulers, not simply as men who happened to hold power, but as sacred beings whose authority derived from cosmic sources. This concept drew on both Hindu and Buddhist ideas about kingship. The king was a bodhisattva, a being far advanced on the path to enlightenment. He was an incarnation of divine principles, a link between earthly and heavenly realms. Complex court rituals reinforced this sacred status, creating elaborate protocols that separated the king from ordinary humanity. When subjects approached the king, they had to perform specific gestures of submission, acknowledging the vast distance between divine ruler and mortal subject. Language used to address or refer to the king employed special vocabulary, royal terms that elevated every aspect of the king's existence above the common. Even the king's physical body was understood as sacred, not to be touched by ordinary hands, not to be looked upon directly by common eyes. This conception of divine kingship served practical purposes. It made rebellion not just treason, but sacrilege, a violation of cosmic order. It provided ideological justification for the concentration of power. It created psychological distance that could protect rulers from assassination or coup. But it also placed heavy burdens on kings themselves, who had to perform divinity convincingly, who were expected to embody perfection even as they remained human beneath the royal regalia. Ayutthaya's location and political stability made it a magnet for trade. Merchants came from China, bringing silk, porcelain, and tea, seeking rice, forest products, and the exotic goods that flowed through Ayutthaya from other regions. Indian merchants arrived with textiles and spices. Persian traders brought carpets, metalwork, and connections to Middle Eastern markets. The city's ports bustled with activity as ships from across Asia loaded and unloaded cargo, as interpreters negotiated in multiple languages, as money changers calculated exchange rates between different currencies. This trade brought tremendous wealth to the kingdom. Royal monopolies on certain goods, taxes on trade, customs duties collected at ports, all filled the treasury and funded the court's lavish lifestyle, the construction of temples and palaces, the maintenance of military forces. Merchant communities from various nations established themselves in Ayutthaya, creating distinct quarters where their languages were spoken, their customs observed, their religious practices maintained. The arrival of European traders added a new dimension to this cosmopolitan mix. Portuguese traders arrived in 1511, the first Europeans to establish regular contact with Ayutthaya. They brought goods unknown in Asia, firearms and European manufactures, and they offered new trade connections to markets on the other side of the world. The Portuguese were seeking spices, the valuable products that commanded extraordinary prices in European markets. And they found in Ayutthaya both a market for their goods and a source for what they sought. The Dutch traders followed, establishing their own trading posts, competing with the Portuguese for commercial advantage. The French arrived with both commercial and diplomatic ambitions, seeking not just trade but political alliance, sending embassies that included missionaries hoping to convert the kingdom to Christianity. English traders came from their East India Company, part of the great European expansion into Asian commerce that was transforming global trade patterns. Ayutthaya navigated these European intrusions with sophistication. The kingdom accepted trade, recognizing the mutual benefits and the access to new goods and markets, but it maintained careful control, granting trading privileges selectively, playing different European powers against one another to maximize Ayutthaya's advantage. The kingdom was never colonized, never subordinated to European power, though individual Europeans served in Ayutthaya's court or military, bringing technical knowledge the kingdom found useful. At its height, Ayutthaya became one of the world's largest cities, with a population estimated at over 1 million people. The capital was a marvel of urban planning and architectural ambition. Hundreds of temples rose across the cityscape, their spires reaching toward the sky, their walls adorned with intricate decorations. Palaces, complex and expansive, housed the king and royal family, court officials and servants. Canals crisscrossed the city, providing transportation routes and linking different neighborhoods. Markets thronged with activity as goods from across Asia and beyond were bought and sold. Foreign visitors who recorded their impressions expressed astonishment at the city's scale and wealth. They described broad avenues and busy waterways, magnificent temples gleaming with gold leaf, markets filled with exotic goods, a cosmopolitan population that included people from dozens of different ethnic and national backgrounds. Ayutthaya seemed to them a rival to the greatest cities of their own experience, comparable to Venice or Amsterdam or the capitals of China. The court culture that developed in Ayutthaya was itself a remarkable synthesis. It blended Thai cultural foundations with Khmer administrative practices and court ceremonies. Indian influence was evident in religious architecture, in the Sanskrit terms used in royal vocabulary, in the stories and epics that inspired literature and drama. Persian elements appeared in court fashions, in architectural details, in aesthetic sensibilities. All these influences were absorbed and transformed, creating something distinctly Ayutthayan, yet cosmopolitan and sophisticated. Literature flourished at court. Poets composed elaborate works drawing on Thai, Indian, and Javanese traditions. The Ramkhamhaeng, the Thai version of the Indian Ramayana epic, was refined and elaborated, becoming central to Thai cultural identity. Drama developed as a courtly art form with elaborate costumes and masks, stylized movements and gestures that required years of training to master. Classical music evolved its own distinctive character. Complex rhythms and melodies performed on traditional instruments. Art and architecture reached extraordinary levels of refinement. Sculptors created Buddha images that balanced serene spirituality with aesthetic beauty. Painters decorated temple walls with scenes from the Buddha's life. And from Thai literature, architects designed structures that combined impressive scale with intricate detail. Buildings that proclaimed both religious devotion and royal grandeur. Craftsmen produced items of daily use that were also works of art. From ceramics to textiles to metalwork, the diversity of influences enriched rather than diluted Thai culture. Each element that was borrowed was adapted, made to fit within Thai aesthetic and conceptual frameworks. Indian stories were retold with Thai settings and sensibilities. Khmer administrative practices were modified to suit Thai political traditions. Persian fashions were worn in distinctively Thai ways. This wasn't mere copying, but creative synthesis, the confident adoption of valuable ideas and practices from elsewhere while maintaining cultural integrity. Daily life in Ayutthaya varied enormously depending on one's position in society. For the common people, life centered on work, mostly agricultural labor for those outside the capital, various crafts and trades for urban residents. The rhythms of planting and harvest, of market days and festivals, of family obligations and community celebrations structured existence. Most people lived simply, their houses modest, their possessions few, their horizons limited to their immediate locality. For the elite, life was vastly different. Court officials and noble families lived in comfortable compounds, served by retainers and slaves. They wore fine clothes, ate varied and abundant food, enjoyed entertainment and leisure. Their children received education, learning to read and write, studying classical literature, being trained in the arts considered essential for cultured people. Political intrigue and competition for royal favor occupied much of their attention. The kingdom's prosperity rested on the labor of the many supporting the privilege of the few, a pattern common to virtually all pre-modern societies. Yet Ayutthaya provided enough stability and prosperity that even common people benefited to some degree. The absence of frequent warfare, the abundance of food, the opportunities for trade and commerce, the functioning of law and order, all contributed to a society that, while hierarchical and often harsh by modern standards, provided its population with basic security and sustenance. Ayutthaya's success story would continue for more than 4 centuries, a remarkable span of continuity and achievement. The kingdom that rose in the Chao Phraya Valley in 1351 would endure through changing circumstances, through wars and successions, through cultural transformations and external challenges, maintaining its independence and prosperity through skill, strength, and adaptability. Yet this prosperity and power were never secure, never guaranteed. To the west, across the mountains and through the forests, another powerful kingdom posed a constant threat. Burma, with its own imperial ambitions and military capabilities, viewed Ayutthaya as both rival and prize. The two kingdoms fought repeated wars across the centuries, conflicts that drained resources, cost countless lives, and shaped the political and military development of both states. These wars followed patterns that became grimly familiar. Burmese armies would gather, a massive force of infantry, cavalry, and war elephants. They would march eastward, crossing mountain passes, fighting through defensive positions, besieging fortified cities. Ayutthaya would mobilize its own forces, calling up provincial levies, assembling its war elephants, preparing the capital's formidable defenses. Battles would be fought, sometimes decisive, more often inconclusive. Territories would change hands, truces would be negotiated, and after some years of peace the cycle would begin again. The constant warfare created a military culture in both kingdoms. Young men trained for combat, learning to use weapons, to ride elephants, to follow commands in the chaos of battle. Generals studied strategy and tactics, learning from previous campaigns, adapting to new challenges. Enormous resources flowed into military preparations, the construction and maintenance of fortifications, the stockpiling of weapons and supplies, the training and equipping of soldiers. In 1569, one of these wars reached a catastrophic conclusion for Ayutthaya. After a prolonged siege, after months of bombardment and assault, after starvation had weakened the defenders and disease had spread through the crowded city, the Burmese finally breached the defenses. The Burmese army sacked the city, looting temples and palaces, carrying away treasures accumulated over 2 centuries, destroying what couldn't be taken. The king was captured, the royal family taken into captivity, the court scattered. The sacking of a capital was a disaster beyond mere military defeat. It represented the collapse of political order, the humiliation of sacred kingship, the apparent end of a dynasty and perhaps a kingdom. Fires consumed wooden structures. Looters ransacked every building of value. The organized life of the city dissolved into chaos and suffering. Those who could flee did so, seeking safety in the provinces or in neighboring kingdoms. Those who remained faced occupation, violence, and privation. Yet Ayutthaya did not end in 1569. After the initial devastation, after the Burmese army withdrew, taking its loot and captives, the survivors began the slow, painful work of recovery and rebuilding. Provincial lords who had escaped capture organized resistance. New leadership emerged from the chaos. The kingdom's fundamental assets remained: the fertile land, the trade routes, the population's skills and resilience, the cultural identity that defined the Thai people. The city itself was gradually restored. Temples were rebuilt, though some remained in ruins for years or decades. The palace was reconstructed, houses rose from ashes, commerce slowly resumed as merchants returned and trade networks were re-established. The population recovered as refugees returned and as people from the provinces moved to the capital seeking opportunities. Within years, Ayutthaya was functioning again as a city and capital, though the scars of 1569 remained visible in damaged monuments and in the collective memory of trauma. The recovery wasn't merely physical, but also political. The kingdom had to reassert its independence, to demonstrate that it remained a power to be reckoned with. This process of national revival found its embodiment in King Naresuan, a prince who had spent years as a hostage in Burma, who understood the enemy intimately, who combined military skill with fierce determination to restore Ayutthaya's sovereignty and dignity. In 1584, King Naresuan formally declared independence from Burmese overlordship. This wasn't a simple proclamation, but a defiant act backed by military preparation. Naresuan had rebuilt Ayutthaya's armed forces, training soldiers, acquiring elephants and weapons, fortifying strategic positions. He understood that independence had to be fought for and defended. that Burma would not accept Ayutthaya's assertion of sovereignty without challenge. The wars that followed were brutal and decisive. Naresuan personally led his armies, fighting in the traditional manner with war elephants in single combat, king against king, commander against commander. He won crucial victories that broke Burmese attempts to reimpose control. He expanded Ayutthaya's territory, pushing into regions that had fallen under Burmese influence, demonstrating strength that discouraged further invasions for decades. Naresuan became a legendary figure in Thai history, the warrior king who restored independence, who refused to accept defeat or subordination, who embodied martial virtue and national pride. Stories of his exploits, especially his famous elephant duel with a Burmese crown prince, entered Thai cultural memory, inspiring later generations, providing a model of heroic kingship in times of crisis. The kingdom reached its height in the 17th century, the era when foreign visitors recorded their astonishment at Ayutthaya's size and wealth, when trade was at its most extensive, when court culture achieved its greatest sophistication. This was the period of maximum prosperity and influence, when Ayutthaya stood as one of the great cities of the world, when its diplomatic missions were received with respect in foreign courts, when its military power was sufficient to deter aggression and project force into neighboring regions. But even at this height, tensions and problems were accumulating. The very success of Ayutthaya created challenges. The court grew more elaborate and expensive, consuming increasing resources. Noble families competed for power and royal favor, their rivalries sometimes spilling into violence. The succession to the throne became a source of instability as different factions supported different candidates, as princes plotted against one another, as the death of a king could trigger civil conflict. Internal conflict gradually weakened the state from within. Succession disputes became more frequent and more destructive. Provincial governors asserted increasing autonomy, becoming semi-independent powers who might or might not obey royal commands. Court politics became bitter and dangerous, with officials scheming against rivals, with accusations of treason and executions of suspected conspirators, creating a climate of fear and suspicion. Military effectiveness declined as political considerations trumped merit in appointments, as funds were diverted to court luxuries rather than military preparedness. The kingdom that had recovered so remarkably from the disaster of 1569, that had achieved such heights under Naresuan and his 17th century successors, was no longer the same formidable power by the 18th century. Internal weaknesses had created vulnerabilities that external enemies could exploit, and Burma, having overcome its own internal problems and reunified under a powerful new dynasty, was preparing to strike again. Burma invaded again in the 18th century with overwhelming force and clear objectives. This wasn't a raid for plunder or a campaign to extract tribute, but a war of conquest and destruction aimed at eliminating Ayutthaya as an independent power permanently. The Burmese assembled a massive army, perhaps the largest they had ever fielded, and launched a coordinated invasion from multiple directions. Ayutthaya's weakened state made effective defense difficult. Provincial forces that should have rallied to the capital's defense moved slowly or not at all. Internal disputes continued even as the kingdom faced existential threat. The capital's defenders, though brave and determined, were outnumbered and undersupplied. The siege lasted months, with conditions inside the city deteriorating steadily as food supplies dwindled, as disease spread, as hope faded. In 1767, Ayutthaya fell for the final time. The Burmese assault was methodical and thorough. They didn't just capture the city, but systematically destroyed it. Buildings were burned, temples demolished, treasures looted or destroyed. The goal seemed to be not just military victory, but the complete eradication of Ayutthaya as a political and cultural center, the obliteration of the kingdom's capacity to recover yet again. The capital burned and fell into ruin. Fires raged for days, consuming everything combustible. Stone temples cracked and collapsed in the heat. Buddha images were melted down for their metal or destroyed. Libraries containing centuries of accumulated texts were lost to flames. The palace complex, once the center of royal magnificence, became a burned-out shell. The city that had been home to 1 million people was reduced to ruins inhabited only by looters and the desperate survivors too weak to flee. The population of Ayutthaya was scattered. Many were killed in the final assault or died in the subsequent chaos. Tens of thousands were taken captive and marched to Burma to be resettled as forced labor or as human trophies of victory. Others fled into the countryside, becoming refugees in their own land, seeking safety wherever they could find it. The elaborate court culture, the sophisticated administrative system, the cosmopolitan commercial networks, all dissolved in a matter of weeks. Thailand entered one of its darkest moments in its history. The kingdom that had existed for over 4 centuries was gone. Its capital was ruins. Its population was scattered or enslaved. Its political structures had collapsed. Foreign observers who had known Ayutthaya's glory could scarcely believe the totality of the disaster. It seemed possible, perhaps even likely, that this was the end, that Thai independence would not survive, that the survivors would be absorbed into Burma, or would remain fragmented, unable to rebuild what had been so completely destroyed. The ruins of Ayutthaya, overgrown and silent, stood as monuments to the impermanence of even the greatest achievements, to the destructive power of war, to the vulnerability of civilization, to violence. Temple spires, once gleaming with gold, pointed skyward from piles of rubble. Stone Buddhas, some intact but many damaged or destroyed, sat among the wreckage. The rivers flowed on, unchanged, past the desolation where a great city had stood. In the silence that followed the catastrophe, it was hard to imagine how recovery could even begin, how Thailand could survive this moment, whether anything would or could rise from these ashes. Yet even in this darkest hour, resistance had not ended. While the Burmese occupied Ayutthaya and controlled the central plains, Thai forces continued fighting in the provinces. Small bands of soldiers, remnants of the royal army, refugees who took up arms, local leaders who refused to accept defeat, all maintained scattered opposition. The kingdom as a political entity might have collapsed, but the will to resist, the refusal to accept permanent subjugation, persisted among enough people to matter. From this chaos, from these desperate circumstances, a military leader named Thaksin rose to power. Thaksin had been a provincial governor and military commander during the final siege of Ayutthaya. When the capital fell, he fought his way out with a small force, refusing capture, determined to continue resistance. He was of Chinese Thai heritage, not of royal blood, lacking the traditional credentials for kingship. But in the vacuum, Created by Ayutthaya's destruction, traditional qualifications mattered less than ability, determination, and success. Thaksin demonstrated all three. He gathered followers, absorbing other resistance groups, building an army from the scattered forces still willing to fight. He won battles against Burmese occupation forces and their local collaborators, demonstrating that resistance was not futile, that the Burmese could be defeated. His victories attracted more supporters, soldiers seeking effective leadership, provinces looking for protection, people hoping for restoration of order. Within months of Ayutthaya's fall, Thaksin had established himself as the dominant Thai military leader. He launched campaigns to drive Burmese forces from Thai territory, fighting a guerrilla war at first, then increasingly conventional battles as his forces grew stronger. The Burmese, having achieved their objective of destroying Ayutthaya, were not prepared for a prolonged occupation against sustained resistance. They began withdrawing, focusing on consolidating control over regions closer to Burma itself. Thaksin pursued the larger vision of reunifying the fractured kingdom, of bringing all the Thai territories back under a single authority. This was a formidable task. The provinces had fragmented after Ayutthaya's fall, with local strongmen asserting independence, with different regions pursuing their own survival strategies. Some territories had accepted Burmese overlordship. Others remained uncontrolled by any larger power. Regional identities and local interests worked against reunification. But Thaksin combined military pressure with political acumen. He defeated those who resisted by force, convincing others to submit peacefully by demonstrating that joining his cause offered better prospects than continued fragmentation. He appointed capable administrators to govern reclaimed territories. He offered positions and honors to local leaders who accepted his authority. Gradually, piece by piece, he rebuilt a kingdom from the wreckage of the old. Thaksin established what became known as the Thonburi Kingdom, named for the location he chose as his base of operations. Thonburi sat on the western bank of the Chao Phraya River, downstream from the ruins of Ayutthaya. The location offered strategic advantages. It was closer to the sea, facilitating trade and communication with maritime regions. It was easier to defend than Ayutthaya had been, with the river providing a natural barrier. And practically it was untouched by war, with buildings and infrastructure intact, ready for immediate use. Thonburi became the new capital, the center from which Thaksin ruled and from which his government administered the reunified territories. The city was much smaller than Ayutthaya had been, lacking the old capital's centuries of accumulated grandeur, but it was functional and secure, adequate for a kingdom focused on survival and reconstruction rather than courtly magnificence. From Thonburi, Thaksin worked to stabilize the nation after years of war and chaos. The immediate priorities were practical and urgent. Food production had to be restored, with farmers returning to abandoned fields, irrigation systems repaired, rice cultivation resumed. Trade needed to be re-established, with merchants encouraged to resume operations, foreign trading partners contacted and reassured about the kingdom's viability. Law and order had to be imposed, with bandits suppressed, disputes adjudicated, a sense of security restored to daily life. The military remained central to Thaksin's reign. Continued threats from Burma required maintaining strong defensive capabilities, Internal challenges, provincial governors who resented central authority or harbored their own ambitions, demanded military vigilance. Taksin led campaigns personally, demonstrating the martial prowess that had made him successful, maintaining the loyalty of soldiers through shared hardship and victory. But the strains of constant warfare, of rebuilding a kingdom from ruins, of maintaining authority without traditional legitimacy, took their toll. Taksin became increasingly autocratic and erratic. Some accounts suggest he showed signs of mental instability in his later years, perhaps driven to madness by the impossible burdens he carried, perhaps simply becoming more tyrannical as absolute power corrupted. He alienated powerful figures at court, punished perceived disloyalty harshly, made decisions that seemed arbitrary or unjust. Religious controversies also surrounded Taksin's later reign. He claimed to have achieved high levels of Buddhist spiritual attainment, asserting a status that many monks and religious authorities questioned or rejected. These religious disputes intertwined with political opposition, creating a coalition of those who had various reasons to desire change in leadership. Taksin was overthrown in 1782 in what was effectively a palace coup. The exact circumstances remain somewhat unclear, obscured by later official accounts that sought to justify the change in dynasty. What is known is that a group of powerful officials and military commanders, led by General Chakri, Taksin's most capable general, removed him from power. Taksin was executed or possibly died in confinement, ending the Thonburi period after just 15 years. The removal of Taksin, whatever its justification, created another moment of potential crisis and instability. The kingdom was again without a ruler, its future uncertain, but the transition proved remarkably smooth, suggesting careful planning by those who had orchestrated the coup. General Chakri, who had led many of the military campaigns that reunified the kingdom, who commanded respect from both military and civilian elites, took the throne with broad support. He became King Rama I, the first king of what would become the Chakri dynasty. The choice of name was significant. Rama, the hero of the Ramayana epic, represented the ideal of righteous kingship, of the just ruler who defeats evil and brings prosperity to his people. By taking this name, the new king signaled his intentions to rule according to traditional Buddhist and Hindu ideals, to restore the moral framework of kingship that had defined Thai monarchy before Ayutthaya's fall. The Chakri dynasty that began with Rama I would prove to be Thailand's last and longest ruling dynasty, continuing to the present day. This longevity resulted partly from good fortune, but more from the dynasty's ability to adapt to changing circumstances, to balance tradition with innovation, to maintain legitimacy through careful attention to both ritual and practical governance. One of Rama I's first major decisions was to establish a new capital. Thonburi, while adequate, was not ideal for a restored kingdom that aspired to reclaim Ayutthaya's glory and status. The king chose a location on the eastern bank of the Chao Phraya River, directly across from Thonburi. This site, a small trading settlement called Bangkok, offered several advantages. It was slightly inland from the coast, providing some protection from maritime threats. The river provided excellent transportation and trade access. The terrain was suitable for building a proper capital city with palaces, temples, and fortifications. Bangkok was established as the capital, destined to grow from a modest beginning into one of Southeast Asia's great cities. The initial construction focused on essential elements. A royal palace was built, designed to evoke memories of Ayutthaya's grandeur, while incorporating practical lessons from the old capital's vulnerability. The Wat Phra Kayu, the Temple of the Emerald Buddha, was constructed to house the most sacred Buddha image, retrieved during the wars, and now installed in the new capital as a symbol of legitimacy and divine favor. The city was laid out with attention to both practical needs and symbolic meanings. Canals were dug, creating transportation networks and helping with drainage. Fortifications were constructed to protect against possible invasion. Temple complexes rose across the city, each funded by royal patronage or wealthy merchants, each contributing to Bangkok's emerging identity as a Buddhist capital. Residential areas developed, with the nobility building compounds near the palace, merchants settling near the river, craftsmen establishing their workshops. The establishment of Bangkok represented more than just choosing a new capital location. It signaled a fresh start, a deliberate act of state building that learned from the past while facing toward the future. The city would never simply replace Ayutthaya, which remained in memory as a kind of golden age, idealized by distance and loss. But Bangkok would develop its own character, its own achievements, becoming the enduring center of Thai political, economic, and cultural life. Rama I's reign focused on consolidation and restoration. Laws were codified, drawing on Ayutthayan precedents, but updated for changed circumstances. The administrative system was rebuilt, with provinces organized under royal governors. The military was reorganized and strengthened. Buddhist institutions were reformed and revitalized, with the monastic order receiving royal patronage and protection. Cultural activities were encouraged, with literature and arts patronized by the court. The king also worked to restore Thailand's international standing. Diplomatic relations were established or renewed with neighboring kingdoms and with European trading nations. The kingdom's ability to defend itself was demonstrated through successful military campaigns that pushed back various threats and expanded territorial control. Trade was encouraged, with Bangkok's ports welcoming merchants from across Asia and Europe. Within 20 years of Ayutthaya's destruction, Thailand had not only survived, but rebuilt itself as a functioning kingdom with a new dynasty, a new capital, restored territories, and renewed confidence. The catastrophe of 1767 had not proven fatal. Instead, it had been followed by one of history's more remarkable recoveries, a testament to Thai resilience, to effective leadership by both Thaksin and Rama I, and to the strength of cultural identity that provided continuity, even through political destruction. Bangkok grew steadily from its founding, expanding beyond its original walls, attracting population from across the kingdom, developing into a true capital city worthy of a revived kingdom. The Chao Phraya River remained central to the city's life, with boats and barges carrying goods and people, with floating markets conducting commerce on the water itself, with the river serving as both highway and boundary, linking Bangkok to the sea and the interior. The Chakri dynasty had successfully established itself, combining traditional legitimacy with demonstrated capability, honoring the past while building for the future. The darkest moment had passed. Thailand had survived, transformed but intact, ready to face whatever challenges the coming centuries would bring. Rama I formally founded what became known as the Ratanakosin Kingdom, named for the district where Bangkok was established. Ratanakosin represented not merely geographical relocation, but a conscious project of restoration and renewal. The king sought to recreate what had been lost with Ayutthaya, while learning from that kingdom's vulnerabilities. This meant building new temples modeled on Ayutthayan architecture, reviving court ceremonies and cultural practices, and reconstructing the institutional framework that had governed the old kingdom. Among Rama I's most significant achievements was the codification of Thai laws. Previous legal codes had been lost when Ayutthaya burned, taking with them centuries of accumulated legal wisdom and precedent. The king assembled scholars, monks, and legal experts to reconstruct Thai law from memory, from surviving fragments, and from first principles. The resulting code, known as the Three Seals Law, organized legal principles systematically, covering everything from criminal offenses and punishments to property rights and family obligations. This codification served multiple purposes. It provided judges with clear standards for rendering decisions. It made law more predictable and accessible to the people. It demonstrated that the new kingdom possessed the institutional sophistication of its predecessor. The process of creating the code also forced careful thinking about what Thai law should be, how Buddhist principles should inform justice, how to balance tradition with practical needs. The legal code addressed slavery, which existed throughout Southeast Asia during this period. While not abolishing the institution, the code regulated it, establishing rights even for enslaved persons, limiting punishments owners could inflict, and providing mechanisms by which debt slaves could work toward freedom. These provisions reflected Buddhist values of compassion and the recognition of universal humanity, even within a system that accepted inequality. Rama I's reign established the foundations. His successor, Rama II, built upon them by promoting arts and literature with particular enthusiasm. The new king was himself a poet and artist, genuinely devoted to cultural pursuits. He understood that a kingdom's greatness was measured not just in military strength or economic prosperity, but in cultural achievements, in the beauty it created, in the refinement of its civilization. Under Rama II's patronage, classical Thai literature flourished. The Ramakien, the Thai version of the Ramayana, was revised and expanded. New poetic works were composed. Traditional drama reached new heights of sophistication, with the king himself writing plays and composing music. Craftsmen received royal support for their work, creating ceramics, textiles, and metalwork that demonstrated Thailand's artistic capabilities. The king's personal involvement in the arts was more than royal hobby. It set cultural standards, encouraging excellence across society. Nobles sought to emulate the king's refinement, supporting artists and poets in their households. Temples received funds for elaborate decorations and renovations. The arts became central to how the kingdom presented itself, domestically and internationally, as a civilization of culture and sophistication. Rama III succeeded to the throne and expanded trade with China, recognizing the economic opportunities in this relationship. China had been a trading partner for centuries, but Rama III actively cultivated the connection. He sent trade missions, negotiated favorable terms, and encouraged Chinese merchants to settle in Bangkok. The Chinese community in the capital grew substantially, contributing merchant skills, artisan crafts, and entrepreneurial energy. This expansion of Chinese trade brought material benefits. Exports of rice, sugar, and forest products to China brought revenue that funded government activities. Imports of Chinese goods, porcelain, silk, tea, met domestic demand and could be re-exported to other markets. The Chinese community paid taxes, invested in local enterprises, and gradually integrated into Thai society while maintaining distinctive cultural practices. Rama III also focused on infrastructure and practical improvements. Canals were extended, improving Bangkok's internal transportation. Temple construction continued, both for religious purposes and as public works that provided employment. The military was strengthened to deter external threats. The king took a hands-on approach to governance, involving himself in administrative details, ensuring that the machinery of state functioned efficiently. But as the 19th century progressed, a new and unprecedented challenge emerged. Western colonial powers, having established dominance in India, Indonesia, and the Philippines, turned increasing attention to mainland Southeast Asia. The British expanded from India into Burma, conquering that kingdom piece by piece. The French began asserting control over Vietnam and later Cambodia and Laos. Thailand found itself surrounded by expanding European empires, its independence potentially threatened by powers possessing superior military technology and aggressive imperial ambitions. Western colonial pressure intensified throughout the region during this period. European powers signed unequal treaties, imposed extraterritorial rights, and demanded commercial concessions. They used gunboat diplomacy, backing demands with military force. Traditional Asian kingdoms, even powerful ones, found themselves unable to resist effectively. Burma fell completely under British control. Vietnam became a French colony. The question was whether Thailand could avoid the same fate. The challenge fell to King Mongkut, Rama IV, who came to the throne in 1851 after spending 27 years as a Buddhist monk. This unusual background proved advantageous. During his monastic years, Mongkut studied not only Buddhist texts, but also Western languages, sciences, and ideas. He learned English and Latin. He corresponded with Western missionaries. He acquired a sophisticated understanding of Western thought and technology, unusual for an Asian monarch of his era. King Mongkut embraced modernization, recognizing that Thailand's survival required adaptation. He understood that Western military superiority stemmed from technological advancement, that their power rested on industrial capacity, scientific knowledge, and organizational efficiency. Rather than rejecting Western ideas as foreign contamination, he sought to adopt what was useful while maintaining Thai independence and cultural integrity. The king hired Western advisors to help modernize various aspects of Thai government and society. He reformed the army along Western lines, introducing new weapons and training methods. He established a printing press, recognizing the power of mass communication. He encouraged the study of Western sciences, mathematics, and languages. He opened the kingdom more fully to foreign trade and influence. Calculated risks he judged necessary for survival. But Mongkut's most crucial strategy for protecting sovereignty was diplomacy. He understood that Thailand lacked the military power to resist European imperialism through force. Instead, he sought to make Thailand useful to the Western powers, to position the kingdom as a buffer state between British and French possessions, to convince both empires that an independent Thailand served their interests better than a conquered one. This diplomatic strategy required careful balancing, maintaining good relations with both Britain and France despite their rivalry, granting concessions to both while preserving core sovereignty. It required understanding Western diplomatic protocols, speaking their languages literally and figuratively, presenting Thailand as a civilized kingdom worthy of respect, rather than as a primitive state requiring colonial tutelage. The Bowring Treaty, signed in 1855 with Britain, exemplified this approach. Sir John Bowring, representing British commercial interests, negotiated a treaty that opened Thailand more fully to British trade. The treaty limited Thai tariffs on imports, granted British subjects extraterritorial legal rights, and gave Britain most favored nation status. These were concessions that infringed on Thai sovereignty in ways that would have been unthinkable decades earlier. Yet Mongkut signed the treaty, recognizing it as the price of continued independence. The economic concessions were real but manageable. The alternative, refusal and potential conflict with Britain, risked catastrophic consequences. By accommodating British commercial demands, Thailand avoided providing justification for military intervention. Similar treaties were signed with other Western powers, each granting concessions, each buying time and space for Thailand to adapt and survive. The gamble succeeded. Thailand remained independent when all its neighbors fell under colonial rule. This unique achievement resulted from geographic factors, Thailand's buffer position between British and French territories, but more fundamentally from the shrewd diplomacy of Mongkut and his successors, their willingness to adapt, to learn from the West while maintaining cultural identity, to make concessions while preserving sovereignty. King Chulalongkorn, Rama V, Mongkut's son, continued and expanded the modernization program. He ruled for 42 years, from 1868 to 1910, a period of dramatic transformation. Chulalongkorn inherited his father's understanding that modernization was necessary for survival, but he had the time, resources, and support to implement reforms more systematically and thoroughly than Mongkut had been able to do. One of Chulalongkorn's most significant and morally important reforms was the abolition of slavery. The process was gradual, implemented over decades to avoid economic disruption and social upheaval. The king first prohibited the sale of slaves, making the institution less commercial. He then decreed that children born to slaves after a certain date would be free. Eventually, full abolition was achieved, ending an institution that had existed for centuries. The abolition reflected both moral conviction and modernization imperatives. Slavery was incompatible with emerging notions of human rights and dignity that Chulalongkorn absorbed from Western thought. It was also economically inefficient, hindering development of a free labor market. The reform demonstrated that Thailand was a progressive nation, strengthening its claim to sovereign equality with Western powers. Beyond slavery abolition, Chulalongkorn oversaw the expansion of railways, education, and modern administration across the kingdom. Railways were particularly important, both strategically and economically. They facilitated military deployment, enabling rapid response to threats. They opened new regions to commercial development. They integrated the kingdom physically, connecting distant provinces to Bangkok, making central authority more effective. The first railway line connected Bangkok to the eastern provinces. Others extended north toward Chiang Mai, south toward Malaysia, northeast toward the Lao regions. Each new line required substantial investment, often foreign loans and technical expertise. But the benefits justified the costs as railways accelerated economic development and political integration. Education reform established Western-style schools throughout the kingdom. Traditional education had centered on monasteries, where boys learned literacy and religious texts. The new schools taught broader curricula, including sciences, mathematics, foreign languages, and practical skills. Secondary schools and eventually universities were established. Study abroad programs sent Thai students to Europe and America to acquire advanced knowledge they could bring home. These educational reforms created a new class of Thais educated in both traditional culture and Western learning, equipped to staff the modernizing bureaucracy, to teach in new schools, to manage modern enterprises. They became agents of further change, interpreting Thailand to the West and the West to Thailand, navigating between two worlds. Administrative modernization reorganized government along functional lines. Ministries were established for specific purposes: interior, foreign affairs, defense, finance, justice. Provincial administration was reformed, with governors appointed from Bangkok replacing hereditary local rulers. Centralization increased, bringing outlying regions under more direct control, though local customs and practices were often accommodated within the new system. These reforms transformed Thailand from a traditional Buddhist kingdom into a modern nation-state, at least in institutional structure. The transformation was uneven, with Bangkok and central regions modernizing faster than remote provinces, with elite classes adapting more readily than common farmers. But the direction was clear, the commitment sustained across decades. By the end of Chulalongkorn's reign in 1910, Thailand had avoided colonization, reformed its institutions, built infrastructure, educated a new generation, and positioned itself to survive in a world dominated by Western powers. The kingdom that had nearly perished in 1767 had not merely recovered, but transformed, adapting to radically changed circumstances while maintaining independence and cultural identity. The old and the new coexisted, sometimes in tension, but creating a distinctively Thai modernity. Thailand's success in avoiding European colonization stands as its most remarkable 20th century achievement, particularly when viewed against what happened to every neighboring kingdom: Burma, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Malaysia, all fell under colonial rule. Only Thailand maintained its sovereignty, a fact that would profoundly shape national identity and political development. This independence was never guaranteed, never secure, but repeatedly defended through diplomatic skill, strategic concessions, and fortunate circumstances. The survival strategy required Thailand to modernize its institutions and economy, to demonstrate it was a civilized nation by Western standards, capable of managing its own affairs. It required maintaining friendly relations with both Britain and France, the colonial powers whose territories surrounded Thailand, ensuring neither saw advantage in conquest. It required internal reforms that strengthened the state, making Thailand more capable of defending itself and more useful as a buffer between rival empires. Yet even as Thailand modernized in many ways, the absolute monarchy continued into the 20th century largely unchanged in its fundamental nature. Kings still ruled without constitutional limits, their authority bounded only by tradition, practical constraints, and their own judgment. The reforms of the 19th century had been royal initiatives, changes imposed from above rather than demanded from below. Power remained concentrated in the monarch and the Bangkok elite surrounding the throne. This continuation of absolute rule occurred even as constitutional government and democracy were spreading globally, even as Thailand sent students to study in countries with elected parliaments and protected rights. The educated class that emerged from Chulalongkorn's educational reforms returned to Thailand with new ideas about governance, about popular sovereignty, about limiting royal power through constitutions and laws. Tensions gradually developed between these new perspectives and the entrenched system of absolute monarchy. The strains became particularly evident during the reign of King Prajadipok, Rama VII, who ascended in 1925. The global economic depression that began in 1929 hit Thailand hard, causing rice prices to collapse, revenues to decline, and economic hardship to spread. The government responded with spending cuts that included salary reductions for civil servants and military officers. These measures created resentment precisely among the Western-educated professionals and military officers who had absorbed ideas about constitutional government. A bloodless revolution occurred in 1932, orchestrated by a group calling themselves the People's Party, composed of military officers and civilian bureaucrats. On June 24th, the conspirators seized control of key locations in Bangkok while the king was at his summer palace. They presented the monarchy with an ultimatum: accept constitutional limits or face abolition. The revolution succeeded without violence because the king chose not to resist, because the military sided with the revolutionaries, and because the broader population, while not actively participating, did not rise to defend absolute monarchy. Thailand thus became a constitutional monarchy, the political system it maintains to the present day. A constitution was promulgated limiting royal power, establishing an elected parliament, defining the rights of citizens. The king remained as head of state, a revered figure embodying national unity and continuity, but no longer exercising absolute authority. Political power shifted to elected representatives and to the military, which had played a crucial role in the revolution and would continue to exert enormous influence. The transition was not smooth or complete. Conflicts emerged immediately between different factions within the revolutionary coalition, between civilians and military officers, between those seeking genuine democracy and those wanting merely to replace royal absolutism with their own authority. The king initially cooperated but became increasingly uncomfortable with how the new system was developing. In 1935, Prajadipok abdicated and went into exile, succeeded by his young nephew Ananda Mahidol, who was still a child and studying abroad. During this period of political upheaval and experimentation, nationalist sentiments intensified. The government sought to create stronger national identity, to unite diverse populations under a common Thai identity. Part of this project involved changing the country's name. For centuries, the kingdom had been known to outsiders as Siam, a name whose origins were unclear, possibly foreign, not the name Thai people used for themselves. The country officially changed its name from Siam to Thailand in 1939, declaring that Thai more accurately reflected the nation's character and its people's identity. The name meant Land of the Free, a proud assertion of the independence Thailand had maintained when its neighbors had lost theirs. The change symbolized both nationalism and modernization, the conscious creation of a nation-state with clearly defined identity and boundaries. This name change occurred under the government of Prime Minister Plaek Phibunsongkhram, a military officer who had participated in the 1932 revolution and who became increasingly authoritarian and nationalist. Phibunsongkhram promoted Thai cultural nationalism, mandating Western dress, encouraging modern behavior, and asserting Thailand's rightful place among the world's nations. His government was militaristic and modernizing, pushing rapid changes while concentrating power in the executive. When World War II erupted in Europe and spread to Asia, Thailand faced impossible choices. As Japanese forces swept through Southeast Asia in late 1941 and early 1942, conquering European colonies with stunning speed, Thailand found itself directly in the path of Japanese expansion. Japanese forces demanded passage through Thai territory to attack British Malaya. Resistance would have meant invasion and conquest. Reluctant submission at least preserved some autonomy. Thailand allied with Japan during World War II, a decision driven by pragmatism rather than ideological sympathy. The government signed a military alliance with Japan, declared war on Britain and the United States, and gained Japanese support for recovering territories in Laos, Cambodia, and Burma that Thailand had previously lost to colonial powers. Thai forces fought alongside Japanese troops in limited operations. Bangkok hosted Japanese military headquarters for operations in Southeast Asia, but the alliance was always ambiguous and conditional. A resistance movement operated throughout the war, secretly supported by some government officials who understood that Japan would ultimately lose. The Thai ambassador in Washington refused to deliver his government's declaration of war, rendering it technically invalid in American eyes. Many Thais quietly undermined the Japanese presence, providing intelligence to the Allies, protecting Allied prisoners of war, maintaining contacts with resistance networks. When Japan surrendered in 1945, Thailand faced potential punishment as a defeated enemy, but the ambiguities of its wartime position, the existence of the resistance movement, and American willingness to be lenient allowed Thailand to escape harsh consequences. Britain demanded return of territories gained during the war and imposed some economic penalties. But Thailand was not occupied, not subjected to war crimes trials, not treated as conquered enemy territory. Instead, after the war, Thailand aligned closely with the United States as the Cold War developed. The Americans saw Thailand as a valuable ally in containing communist expansion in Southeast Asia. Thailand received military aid, economic assistance, and political support. American military bases were established on Thai soil. Thai troops fought in the Korean War alongside American forces. The relationship became a cornerstone of Thai foreign policy for decades. This American alignment occurred within a domestic context of political instability and military dominance. The brief post-war period of civilian democratic government ended in 1947 with a military coup. From then on, military rule dominated much of the Cold War era. Generals took power through coups, governed authoritically, and were eventually overthrown by other military factions in subsequent coups. Elections occurred periodically but were often manipulated, with military-backed parties maintaining control. The military justified its political role through appeals to anti-communism, national security, and the need for stability and development. Thailand's strategic importance in American Cold War strategy meant Washington tolerated and often supported military governments, prioritizing anti-communist reliability over democratic governance. Military leaders received American training, weapons, and financial support, strengthening their position domestically. Thailand fought internal communist insurgencies throughout the 1960s and 1970s, particularly in the northeast and south. Communist movements had some popular support among impoverished rural populations who saw little benefit from Bangkok-centered development. These insurgents received support from communist Vietnam and China. The Thai government responded with military operations, with village security programs, and with development initiatives aimed at winning rural support. The insurgencies never threatened to overthrow the government but created persistent security challenges and justified military political dominance. Thousands died in fighting that lasted for years. Villages in affected areas faced restrictions and scrutiny. The conflict reinforced authoritarian tendencies, with dissent often branded as communist sympathy, with harsh measures justified by security necessity. Yet even during this period of military rule and internal conflict, Thailand experienced rapid economic growth that transformed the country fundamentally. Beginning in the 1960s and accelerating through subsequent decades, Thailand's economy expanded dramatically. Agriculture modernized and diversified. Industry developed, initially focused on textiles and light manufacturing, later expanding into electronics, automobiles, and other sectors. Tourism emerged as a major industry, with visitors attracted to Thailand's beaches, culture, and hospitality. This growth reflected several factors. Thailand's political stability, despite military governments and coups, contrasted favorably with the war's devastating Indochina. American military spending during the Vietnam War pumped resources into the Thai economy. Government policies encouraged foreign investment and export-oriented industries. Infrastructure development, railways and highways and ports built over decades, facilitated commerce. The Thai workforce proved adaptable and hardworking. Economic growth created a new middle class, urban and educated, employed in modern sectors, consuming goods and services beyond basic necessities. Bangkok exploded in size and sophistication, transforming from a large traditional Asian city into a modern metropolis of skyscrapers, shopping centers, and gridlocked traffic. Other cities grew as well, though none approached Bangkok's dominance. Rural areas also changed, though more slowly and unevenly. Cash crops replaced pure subsistence farming. Electricity reached villages. Roads connected previously isolated areas to markets and services. Television brought Bangkok culture and government messages to the countryside. Young people migrated to cities seeking opportunities, sending money back to support families, bridging rural and urban worlds. The economic transformation was real and substantial, lifting millions out of poverty, creating opportunities unimaginable to previous generations. But growth also brought problems. Income inequality widened, with urban areas and the central region prospering while northeastern and southern rural areas lagged. Environmental damage accelerated as forests were cleared, rivers polluted, and natural resources exploited for quick profit. Traditional communities and ways of life faced pressures from commercialization and modernization. By the 1980s, Thailand had become a middle-income country, no longer among the world's poorest nations, but not yet fully developed. The military's political dominance was beginning to face challenges from the growing middle class, which increasingly demanded democratic governance, accountability, and civilian rule. Economic success had created social forces that would push for political change, setting the stage for struggles over democracy that would define subsequent decades. The tensions between military authoritarianism and demands for democracy erupted dramatically when student uprisings swept through Bangkok in October 1973. University students, frustrated by military dictatorship, organized protests demanding a new constitution and democratic elections. What began as campus demonstrations grew into massive street protests involving hundreds of thousands of people, not just students but workers, middle-class professionals, and ordinary citizens who shared desires for political change. The military government initially responded with force, arresting protest leaders and banning demonstrations. But the protests continued and expanded, with students occupying key areas of Bangkok. On October 14th, the confrontation reached a crisis point. Security forces fired on protesters, killing dozens and wounding hundreds. The violence shocked the nation. King Bhumibol Adulyadej, whose reign had begun in 1946, intervened personally, providing refuge for student leaders and persuading military leaders to step down. The uprising succeeded. The military government collapsed, replaced by civilian leadership. A new constitution was drafted and elections held. For a brief period, Thailand experienced genuine democratic governance, with multiple parties competing, press freedom expanding, and civil society organizations flourishing. The victory seemed to suggest that Thailand was transitioning irreversibly toward democracy, that military rule was a thing of the past. But the democratic opening proved fragile and short-lived. Conservative forces, worried about leftist influence and social disorder, organized against the civilian government. Right-wing paramilitary groups formed, attacking leftist students and activists. Political violence became increasingly common. The military and conservative elites plotted a return to power, seeing the democratic experiment as chaotic and threatening to established interests. A violent crackdown followed in October 1976. Students gathered at Thammasat University to protest the return of a former dictator were attacked by police, military forces, and right-wing militants. The violence was brutal and horrific, with students beaten, tortured, and killed. The exact death toll remains disputed, but dozens died and many more were injured. Photographs of the violence, including bodies of students lynched and burned, became seared into Thailand's collective memory. The massacre provided justification for a military coup that same day. The armed forces seized power, suspended the constitution, and installed a military government. The democratic period was over, crushed with extreme violence. Many student activists fled to the countryside, some joining the communist insurgency. others simply hiding until it became safe to return. The events of 1976 marked a profound trauma in Thai society, demonstrating the limits of reform and the willingness of conservative forces to use extreme violence to maintain control. Political instability continued for decades following these events. Thailand cycled through periods of military rule, brief democratic openings, new coups, and attempted transitions. Constitutions were written and rewritten, each reflecting the balance of power at a particular moment. Some military leaders eventually allowed elections, stepped aside in favor of civilian governments, only for new crises to emerge and new coups to occur. The pattern became grimly familiar. Throughout this instability, King Bhumibol remained a constant presence, revered by most Thais as a stabilizing force above politics. The king intervened at key moments, mediating conflicts, endorsing certain outcomes, using his moral authority to influence events. His role was complex and sometimes controversial, but for many Thais, he represented continuity and legitimacy in an otherwise chaotic political landscape. Despite persistent political problems, the economy continued expanding. An economic boom occurred in the 1990s that was remarkable even by Thailand's previous standards of growth. Foreign investment poured in, attracted by low labor costs, political stability relative to some neighbors, and government policies encouraging export industries. Manufacturing expanded dramatically, with Thailand becoming a major producer of electronics, automobiles, and consumer goods. Bangkok modernized at breathtaking speed. Skyscrapers transformed the skyline. Elevated trains and subways were constructed to address traffic congestion. Shopping malls, international hotels, and office towers multiplied. The city became increasingly cosmopolitan, hosting international businesses, attracting expatriates, developing sophisticated financial and service sectors. Real estate values soared as development spread across the metropolitan area. Tourism exploded during this period, with Thailand becoming one of the world's most popular destinations. Millions of visitors annually came to experience beaches, temples, cuisine, and Thai hospitality. The industry created jobs, generated foreign exchange, and brought cultural exchange alongside economic benefits. Beach resorts transformed from quiet fishing villages into major tourism centers. Ancient temples became major attractions. Thai cuisine gained international recognition. The boom created tremendous optimism and confidence. Thailand seemed destined for developed nation status within a generation. The middle class expanded rapidly, enjoying prosperity previous generations could never have imagined. Consumer culture flourished as people bought cars, televisions, and other markers of modern life. Bangkok and other cities pulsed with energy and ambition, but the boom was built partly on unsustainable foundations. Banks lent recklessly, particularly for real estate speculation. Foreign borrowing increased dramatically, creating vulnerability to sudden capital outflows. Asset bubbles inflated in property and stock markets. Warning signs emerged but were largely ignored in the euphoria of continued growth. The Asian financial crisis struck Thailand in 1997, beginning with the collapse of the Thai baht in July. Speculators attacked the currency, betting that its fixed exchange rate was unsustainable given Thailand's economic vulnerabilities. The government initially tried to defend the baht using foreign reserves, but ultimately had to abandon the peg, allowing the currency to float. The baht crashed, losing half its value within months. The currency collapse triggered broader economic crisis. Companies that had borrowed in foreign currencies suddenly faced crushing debt burdens. Banks holding bad loans faced insolvency. Construction projects halted mid-development. Unemployment soared as businesses closed. The stock market collapsed. The real estate bubble burst, leaving half-finished buildings standing empty. The boom turned to bust with shocking speed. The International Monetary Fund provided emergency loans conditional on strict austerity measures and economic reforms. The government cut spending, raised interest rates, and closed insolvent financial institutions. These measures stabilized the situation eventually, but at tremendous human cost. Millions fell back into poverty. Middle-class families lost businesses and homes. Workers lost jobs. The social pain was immense and widespread. The crisis had profound political consequences. The government that oversaw the collapse fell from power. Demands for accountability and reform intensified. Out of the crisis came recognition that Thailand needed better governance, stronger institutions, more democratic accountability. The old ways of elite-dominated politics seemed increasingly inadequate for managing a modern economy. A new constitution was adopted in 1997, known as the People's Constitution, because of the relatively inclusive process by which it was drafted. The Constitution strengthened democratic institutions, including creating an independent electoral commission, establishing constitutional courts, and providing mechanisms for citizen participation. It guaranteed civil liberties and human rights more explicitly than previous constitutions. It aimed to make government more accountable and reduce opportunities for corruption. The 1997 Constitution represented genuine effort at democratic reform, attempting to address systemic problems that had plagued Thai politics for decades. Many hoped it would provide a stable framework for democratic development, ending the cycle of coups and political instability. Elections under the new constitution would, it was hoped, produce governments with genuine legitimacy and popular support. Thaksin Shinawatra became prime minister in 2001, winning elections decisively under the new constitutional framework. Thaksin was a telecommunications billionaire who entered politics promising active government intervention to stimulate economy recovery from the financial crisis. His Thai Rak Thai party campaigned on populist policies including universal health care, debt relief for farmers, and village development funds. Thaksin's government implemented these programs aggressively. The 30-baht universal health care scheme provided medical coverage for millions of poor Thais who previously lacked access. Agricultural debt was suspended or forgiven. Villages received development funds to invest in local projects. The policies were enormously popular among the rural poor and working class, who felt they finally had a government addressing their needs. But Thaksin also proved divisive and controversial. His government was accused of corruption, of using state power to benefit his business interests and those of political allies. He was criticized for authoritarian tendencies, including attacks on press freedom and harsh crackdowns on drug trafficking that resulted in thousands of extrajudicial killings. The traditional elite, including military leaders, bureaucrats, and urban middle class, increasingly opposed him despite his electoral popularity. Thailand split into opposing camps. Thaksin's rural and working-class supporters, particularly in the north and northeast, remained loyal, seeing him as the first leader who genuinely cared about them. His opponents, concentrated in Bangkok and southern Thailand, viewed him as corrupt and dangerous to democracy. The conflict wasn't just about Thaksin personally, but reflected deep social divisions: urban versus rural, rich versus poor, traditional elite versus emerging forces. The military staged a coup in 2006, overthrowing Thaksin's government while he was abroad and installing a military-backed interim administration. The coup makers cited corruption and abuse of power, promising to restore order and then return power to civilians. They abrogated the 1997 Constitution, drafted a new one with provisions limiting the power of elected governments, and eventually held elections. But the coup didn't resolve the underlying conflicts. Parties allied with Thaksin continued winning elections. His opponents responded with street protests, court challenges, and eventually another coup in 2014. That second coup brought the military back to power more directly, with General Prayuth Chan-o-cha becoming prime minister, and the armed forces essentially ruling the country through a carefully controlled political system. The coups reflected Thailand's persistent inability to resolve political conflicts through democratic means. When electoral outcomes didn't favor those with traditional power, particularly the military and Bangkok elite, they simply overthrew elected governments. This pattern made mockery of democratic ideals while deepening social divisions. Each coup claimed to be necessary for stability. Each promised eventual return to democracy. But the underlying problems persisted. Amid these political upheavals, a moment of profound national significance occurred when King Bhumibol Adulyadej died in October 2016 after a historic reign lasting 70 years. His death marked the end of an era. Bhumibol had been king since 1946, providing continuity through all of Thailand's turbulent modern history. He had reigned through military dictatorships and democratic experiments, through economic booms and crises, through social transformations and political conflicts. The king's death prompted extraordinary outpouring of grief. Millions of Thais wore black mourning clothes for months. Elaborate funeral ceremonies were prepared, eventually held a year later with traditional royal rituals on a scale unseen for decades. For many Thais, particularly older generations, Bhumibol's reign was virtually coterminous with modern Thailand itself. His passing created uncertainty about the future even beyond normal succession concerns. Crown Prince Vajiralongkorn succeeded as King Rama X, assuming a position carrying enormous symbolic weight, but also political complexity. The new king inherited a country deeply divided, with democratic institutions weakened by military rule, with social tensions unresolved, with economic challenges mounting. How the monarchy would evolve under the new reign remained uncertain, as did Thailand's broader political trajectory. Thailand today exists at a crossroads, balancing tradition and modernity, attempting reform while maintaining continuity, navigating between democracy's promise and authoritarianism's recurring appeal. The country faces familiar challenges alongside new ones. Political divisions persist, with fundamental disagreements about power, representation, and the nation's direction. Economic inequality remains substantial. urban prosperity contrasting with rural poverty. Rapid social change creates generational tensions as younger Thais embrace global culture while older generations defend traditional values. Yet Thailand also demonstrates remarkable resilience and adaptability, qualities displayed throughout its history. The culture remains vibrant and distinctive. Buddhism continues providing spiritual framework for millions. The economy, while facing challenges, remains substantial and diverse. Thai cuisine, arts, and culture enjoy worldwide appreciation. The people continue navigating difficulties with the same pragmatism and flexibility their ancestors showed in centuries past. The story of Thailand, from ancient hunter-gatherers to modern nation-state, encompasses triumph and tragedy, growth and destruction, continuity and transformation. It reflects universal human experiences, the building of civilizations, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the struggles over power and justice, the persistent search for prosperity and meaning. Through it all, through 40,000 years of human presence in this land, through countless generations that lived and died leaving their contributions, Thailand endures, changed but recognizable, facing an uncertain future while carrying forward the accumulated weight of its long past. The Thailand that emerged from the Cold War era was dramatically different from the traditional Buddhist kingdom of a century earlier. It was urbanized, industrialized, integrated into global capitalism, hosting millions of tourists annually. Yet it remained distinctively Thai, with Buddhism still central to culture and identity, with monarchy still revered despite constitutional limits, with traditional festivals and customs persisting alongside modern lifestyles. The challenges of balancing tradition and change, of managing rapid development, of building genuine democracy would continue to shape Thailand's path forward.